Because our impact particles, those explosions, aren't pooled yet, we're still not completely saving ourselves from the issues that we'll have with performance. So let's set up a more generic pooling setup that'll work for our impact particles and any other impact or explosion type things that we might want to show. We're going to start by going into our blaster shot script right to the spot where we spawn our explosion. And instead of spawning our explosion and telling it to destroy, let's just tell our pool manager to spawn one at this specific point. We'll say pool manager dot instance dot, and here we have a get blaster shot. Let's say get blaster explosion. And then we'll pass in the point or position where we want to spawn this thing at, which is our second parameter right here, the collision contact point. So I'm going to copy that and paste it as a parameter. I accidentally got the comma, so I'll hit backspace, go over and add my semicolon. Now I know that I want this to last a little less than a second. The rotation doesn't seem to matter, and the impact explosion is a prefab that I have defined up above. So I'm going to delete lines 51 and 52. Just hit shift delete, and then I'm going to go up to the part where I have my impact explosion, and I'm going to double click that line or just click and hit home and hit Control X to get that onto my clipboard. Now I'll generate a method for get blaster explosion. Alt enter to generate the method and F12 to go to it. So inside of my get blaster explosion, I just want to return back an object from a blaster explosion pool and set its, but also set its point or position to this point. So we'll say var explosion equals, and then we'll say underscore, let's call this explosion pool dot get. We don't have an explosion pool yet, but we'll get one in a moment. Then we'll say explosion.transform.position equals point. And then finally, return explosion. I'm going to change the return type here to be a game object. So we'll just return back any old type of object. And the type, or the public, we're going to replace internal here with public. There we go. Now we're going to need an explosion pool to get our objects from and to put things into. So let's go up to our pool manager up at the top and take a look at where we have our blaster shot pool. Right here on line 11, we have an object pool of type blaster shot named pool. I'm going to rename this to blaster shot pool. Capitalize the S and the P so that we keep that nice camel case. So I've got a blaster shot pool, and I also want to have a pool for our blaster explosion. I have the blaster explosion line already on my clipboard, so I'm just going to paste it in, or it's the impact explosion. So maybe I should just call this, I'm going to call it blaster impact explosion. Let's rename it. So I've got my blaster impact explosion. I have my blaster shot pool. I need a blaster impact explosion pool. So I'm going to duplicate line 12, and I'm going to copy, what is this, line 10, blaster impact explosion, all the way up to the word pool and paste it. We'll change the type here from blaster shot to game object, so that it doesn't need to be a blaster shot and it can be any old type of object. And then we'll instantiate the pool in our awake. To instantiate the pool, we'll just add in a new set of lines. Let's type it out this time instead of copy and pasting. And I'll say blaster impact explosion pool equals new, and then let it auto-complete. Now we'll give it our three methods. The first thing that we need to do is give it a way to add or create an impact explosion, which is just going to be instantiating an object, setting its pool, and then returning it. So right now, let's just return an object instead of instantiating one, or let's instantiate one instead of doing one where we have a pool to set, because we don't have anything to set a pool on yet. So we're going to use a lambda statement. I'll do an open close parentheses, and then equals greater than instantiate. Got to spell it right. Instantiate. Let's see if I can spell it. There we go. And then open parentheses, and we'll do our blaster impact explosion. And I'm going to rename this to add the word prefab at the end, so that I know very obviously that this is the prefab. So that's line 1, or the first parameter. Then I'll add a comma. And then our second is the set active and set inactive stuff. So we've got to just basically copy lines 21 and 22. So say T and do our lambda, T.game object, or actually we're already on a game object, so we'll just do T.set active to true. And then for the third parameter, we do T and another lambda, T.set active to false. We'll add in the closing parentheses and the semicolon, and now we have a pool that will give us back an object and oh, that's pretty much it. It'll just give us back an object. Now we need to replace the word explosion pool here with what I named it, which was Blaster Impact Explosion Pool. And save. If we just use this, it's going to get us our objects, but you may have noticed that we're still missing something. We're not actually returning our objects to the pool. And that's part of the issue with the game objects. If we want to return them to the pool, we're going to have to do something else. We're going to have to give them some script or some way to know how long they need to be alive for or when they should return. Now, there are easy ways to do this and hard ways to do this, and my recommendation is almost always go with the easy way until it doesn't work and until you actually need to go with something harder. So what we're going to do is create a new script that's more generic that we can add to any object that will just return it to its own pool after some amount of time that we can define on the prefab. Let's start by typing down at the bottom of our pool manager. We're going to make a public class called return to pool. We'll inherit from mono behavior, so we have the colon mono behavior. And then we're going to add in here an on enable. So in on enable, when we've enabled ourselves, we're going to invoke a method, and I'm going to call this release. Well, actually, we need the word name of here, name of, the keyword right around the release name, and get rid of that capital S there. And then we're going to delay that by some amount of time. Let's call that delay, underscore delay. We'll generate a field for the delay, which is going to be a float, and then we'll make this a serialized field instead of private. And I'm going to give it a default value of maybe like a half a second. We can modify this per object, so it'll be totally customizable. Next, we'll generate a method for the release. So I hit Alt-Enter and generate release method. Make it return back void or nothing, so it has no return. Get rid of the private keyword. Let's get rid of this private keyword up here as well. And then in the release, we're just going to tell it to return itself to its pool. So say pool or underscore pool dot release this. Now we don't have a reference to a pool, so that's the last thing we're going to need. We're going to make a public method, public void set pool that takes in a pool of type return to pool. So it'd be an object pool of type return to pool. Now I'm going to use a lambda statement and just say underscore pool equals pool. I can also turn the release method into an expression body and then hit Alt-Enter and generate the field for it. So now we have an object pool. Oh, it didn't give me the object pool type. That's a little bit obnoxious, but I'll just copy it right here. Object pool return to pool. We'll paste that right in and save. We'll do a quick build, and now that we have one more issue that we need to remove this script from this file. It needs to be in its own file. It's a mono behavior, and for it to work and be a valid component, it has to be the first class in the file. So we're going to move it to its own file, return to pool.cs. Then we'll go back into the pool manager, and the final thing we need to do is just replace these instances of game object with return to pool. For our blaster impact explosion, I'm going to actually also need to call .gameObject here. By the way, if you're not sure how to do that, the thing I just did there, just click, hold Alt, click and drag, and then you can type on multiple lines at once and go back on multiple lines as well. Where else are we missing it? It looks like the explosion prefab needs the correct type as well. And then finally, we need to make sure that we're setting the pool, because in our initialization right here, we just instantiate the object, we don't set the pool. We have a couple options. We could make another method like we have for our add blaster shot to pool, or I could just add in a little lambda statement or a little inside of our lambda statement, some parentheses and a couple more lines. If we just have one thing after the lambda, we don't need a semicolon, but if we have more than one thing and we have them in these parentheses, we need a semicolon for each line. So I have a line to instantiate it, and we need to assign that to something. So I'll call this var shot equals instantiate. Then we'll say shot.setPool. We'll pass in our blaster impact explosion pool, and then finally return shot. This is exactly the same as creating a method down here, just with a little bit less code, kind of keeping it all compact so that it's in one spot. Let's save, do another build. That build popped up one more error that I missed, which is right here that our get blaster explosion isn't returning the right type. It's got a game object instead of a return to pool. Let's try one more build, see if that works. Do we get it? Did all the errors go away? I think so. Let's go back into Unity and tab in. I'm still seeing an error down there, but I think it just hasn't caught my new file change because the return to pool file moved to its own file and it hasn't updated it in the editor yet. Once I tab over, it should reload everything and then reappear, and the error should just disappear. Oh, there it goes. It popped back up my code editor. Yep. And now my build succeeds before I can even see it in here. So let's press play and see if everything is properly pooling now. Oh, you know what? It's definitely not because I haven't added the prefab to my game manager or my pool manager, and I haven't added the script to the prefab. So let's go do that first, and then we'll press play and make sure that it all works. So here's my pool manager. Let's go find that blaster shot impact, or the explosion right here, and drag it on, but I can't drag it on because it doesn't have the component that it needs, the return to pool. So I'll add the return to pool component to the prefab, go find my pool manager again, drag my blaster impact explosion on, and apply changes to my override. Then we'll go into play mode and start blasting. Let's watch these explosions all start to go into the pool. There we go. I can see my explosions coming out of the pool and going back in. They're getting re-added, re-disabled, or enabled and re-disabled. And I end up with a nice steady amount of blaster shots, and everything is, I think, working pretty well. Let's get one more player in here just for the fun of it. Make sure that we're still seeing all of our shots properly. Yep, looks good. They can shoot right through each other. And my blaster shots are, I think, looking pretty nice. So I'm going to stop playing, save everything off, make sure that I've got my scene saved, and again, my prefab overrides in there. And then we'll go into plastic and say that we've added a return to pool, a generic, let's say, added generic return to pool script for the explosions on pool manager. And we'll check that in.